Alright, here we are, FYE 102 final project. Incredible. I don't know how I survived, but I suppose much like Mothra, I pop out of an egg every now and again to do work, and then I apparently die to save Godzilla. According to Holly. No. But I am still here to talk about Mothra, specifically what she represents, though to understand Mothra, we need to understand a few things about what a kaiju is, who is she, what's her backstory, how does she represent environmentalism. But seriously, what is a kaiju? A kaiju is typically defined in pop culture as a giant monster who represents a big concept that humans are currently terrified of. Like how Godzilla used to represent the terror of the nuclear bomb in post-war Japan and following the Bikini Atoll nuclear testings, which had actually destroyed a Japanese fishing boat, much like what happens in the very first moments of the original 1954 Godzilla. Mothra is typically representative of environmentalism and of the oppression of Native people. She was first introduced in The Luminous Fairies in Mothra, a book in 1961, and she was also, which was later adapted to screen by Toho Pictures, who are the same people who made Godzilla, in her very own standalone film, Mothra, also created in 1961. She later appears in Godzilla vs. Mothra 1964, Godzilla vs. Mothra 1992, Battle for Earth, Godzilla Final Wars, GMK, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, the legendary monsters, Mothra. I actually have a figurine of her on my desk as we speak. I love that design. She sometimes can shoot energy beams from her wing or from her antenna. She can sprinkle pollen from her wings. She shoots her larva, will shoot silk. She has a lot of powers. Sometimes she'll have them, sometimes she won't. It's just the nature of different adaptations by different directors. Same with Godzilla, his nuclear breath changes quite a lot. And I don't know if you've seen... I'm going off on a tangent. let me keep going. Sometimes she'll work against Godzilla, sometimes she'll work with him. Even though she changes from adaptation to adaptation, she's still the same thing. She still represents the same thing, the environment. So, we've established who she is and what she symbolizes very basically. Well, obviously we're about to expand more on that, but basic generalization, environmentalism, oppression of Native peoples. Let's talk more about the environmentalism aspect of that. Well, Mothra is a moth, very clearly based on her name. A moth has an actually very repetitive life cycle. They will spend most of their time as larvae and typically can go up to 2 years. They'll cocoon themselves in and then they'll emerge in their adult stages with these beautiful, beautiful wings. This is a Sauropia moth, which is a giant silk moth, and it is actually the largest silk moth that is native to North America. I chose this one because it has kind of similar to Mothra, where it's the orange, the black, the white. Yes. And once they blossom into their adult phases, they are very focused on mating. They're very focused on reproducing. Silk moths don't have mouths, so they can't eat. They actually will mostly just live on body fats that are basically stored in them from their larval stages. And this is actually very similar to what Mothra will do in the movies, where once she gets towards the end of her adult life cycle, she'll lay an egg and, well, she'll blossom from it. But, so, that being said, if Mothra seeks to protect nature, are humans really a part of that? It's a very big question. I mean, in a lot of her films, she's seen attacking humans, but oftentimes she's attacking humans because they've done her people wrong, they've done her island wrong. Her home, Infant Island, was destroyed 3/4 of it were destroyed by nuclear testing from the Japanese government. Or was it the Russian government? Either way, it was destroyed by nuclear testing. And her people were killed by the dozens, which again, we'll talk about later, but for now, let's just talk about some real-world examples of environmental disasters, specifically ones that are happening in slow motion with the takeover of invasive species. This is kudzu, a very invasive plant form. That is a spotted lanternfly, which I know that a lot of people hate. I hate them as well, since they are not native to this region and will destroy and eat at a lot of our trees. I literally went to Baker Park the other day and left covered in their little babies. I hate them. And these are just two examples of invasive plants and animals. When you have an invasive species, it adds more competition than necessary to a native environment. When creating gardens, it's very encouraged for people to choose native plant species. And when seeing an invasive animal, it is very encouraged that if you are not qualified to take care of that invasive animal, call somebody to take care of it for you. And I know it is very sad, but unfortunately, those animals do need to die because they will add a lot of ecological harm to our native plants and animals. And, well, I know some people will like to not hear it, but a lot of these invasive species came because of human migration, especially like English ivy or bamboo. How do you think a lot of those got there? Ooh, pretty plant. Let me put this on my lawn. Oops, it's actually killing a lot of our native plants, but I digress. If people are the reason for invasive species, does this mean that maybe Batra was right and that humans are an inherent threat to the environment and therefore all need to die? I can't really say. I don't really agree, obviously. Neither does Mothra. I'm also a human. I like to think I'm not an inherent threat to the environment. But here we are. And I can't say that maybe I am, but our government definitely seems to be. Currently, the American government is very much against environmental policy, and historically, it's never been an easy fight. For example, in 1979, President Jimmy Carter installed solar panels onto the roof of the White House to make the White House a little bit more sustainable in its energy usage, and then they were torn down a few years later by Ronald Reagan, who proceeded to gut U.S. renewable energy policy. Currently in 2025, President Donald Trump slashed National Park Service budget, a service that provides $55 billion in revenue on normal years and receives less than $3 billion in annual budget a year to maintain parks, pay employees, and conduct some incredibly important environmental research. The so-called Big Beautiful Bill allows for resale of public lands and the reduced cost of oil and gas drilling on these public lands. The current head of the U.S. Department of Interior is the former governor of North Dakota and a very, very, very good friend of the big oil industry, hence why I have an image of oil drilling out west. Even the American dream of having a white picket fence on a green grass lawn is very, very, very just not really, it's a very limited idea. It's mostly limited to a specific group of upper class, mostly white people, and with HOAs galore to ensure a uniformity of the neighborhood. And you could compare the U.S. government to Nelson, the wealthy businessman in Mothra who actually kidnaps the Shobijin, which are Mothra's little fairies and have a psychic connection to the monster. He kidnaps them and he forces them to perform in his little show. Yeah. Speaking of exploitation of people, it is no secret that the American government has very, very bad history with its treatment of Native peoples. Another aspect of Mothra's symbolism And that is a complete understatement as well. During President Andrew Jackson's, under President Andrew Jackson, various native tribes were forcibly removed from their homelands and sent to live on reservations out west, mostly in Oklahoma. Native children were sent to schools made to civilize them, and these schools were very often, I have no other way to describe it other than, well, Richard Henry Pratt, the founder of the Carlisle Indian School and headmaster for 25 years, I think put it best what the purpose of these schools are for. A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one. In a sense, I agree with that statement, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. I don't think I need to describe how terrible of a statement that is. I mean, take a child away from their home and re-educate them according to what the government deems to be normal is very often the first sign of a genocide. And well, this is not just the first sign, this is an advanced stage at this point in history. This is also going back to what I mentioned earlier of the people of Bikini Atoll. The US government wanted their island to conduct nuclear tests. They were forcibly removed from their island, relocated multiple times for years, and when they were finally told to go back, that they were allowed back on their island, that their island was safe, a few years later it was discovered that they had a very, very high amount of cesium-137, a very highly radioactive material within them, and were then forced to relocate once again. Compare this again to the Relisican government from 1961's Mothra, which is the country that Nelson is from. This government essentially is a friend to Japan and does not force Nelson to return the girls that he kidnapped from their home because, well, money is money, I guess. And then, I mean, yeah. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that, it is easy to fix these things, and I wish that I could say it was as easy as 1961's Mothra, where Nelson is quite literally shot dead in the street and the girls are returned home. But it is not. It is not. Mothra represents environmentalism at its core. She represents the forces of nature fighting back. And even though it's not obviously in real life, a giant moth is not flying through the skies to find the two girls that she has a psychic link to, it's not good. It's really not a good situation. Nature is an eternal force. It is not something that humans can control, no matter how hard we try. How many times have you heard of a civilization that made a giant monument so that people can remember them long down the line, but we don't remember them because either that monument was destroyed by nature or by human hands. I wish I could say that everything can just be fixed by a giant monster. Unfortunately, it cannot, and it will not be fixed until we wise up, until the people that are in charge of our government understand that it is not okay to mistreat nature. It is not okay to mistreat native peoples. It is not okay to mistreat anybody that is under their rule, under their command, that lives under their law. It is not okay to mistreat people that also do not live under their law, as that is not their home. But until we understand that the environment at its core is something we cannot control, Mothra will keep returning. She will keep fighting. Even if Legendary Monsters just uses her as the pretty moth that dies so that Godzilla can be saved. If Toho will forget about her, I will never forget about her. She was my favorite monster growing up. I truly love her. Her death and her life cycle continues to represent the Earth itself. You and I will die one day, and I know that that is a morbid thought. I like to think that people will remember me. I like to think that my home will last forever, but it probably will not. And I hope that you take away from this video that even though Mothra is a monster, quote unquote, she is something more than that. She is the environment fighting back against human oppression. She is just so much more than just big pretty moth that dies in the end. And all I can hope is that people will never forget her, will never forget the impact she has. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you have a wonderful summer, and I hope that you go out. Visit a national park, plant a native species in your garden, help, I don't know, explore, understand nature, and be kind to it. Pick up litter that you see on the road. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. I know it feels a little scattered. I will submit my script along with this video. I hope you have a wonderful day.